I understood every single thing this person said. And then they signed this one sign. What did that mean? The deaf community will humble you really quickly. I don't even cuss. And so I'm like, the F word's trying to come out of my mouth. You can be certified, but not qualified, or you could be qualified and not certified. The program doesn't prepare you for Alcoholic Anonymous testimony, right? You find yourself in situations and then you realize, oh, here's a limitation of mine. One thing that really frustrates them is...
Welcome to the Keyconceptspodcast. Today we have our special guest, someone who is giving voice to the voiceless. We're joined by Marguerite Vigneri, and today we're stepping into the world of sign language interpreting. Margaret, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Marguerite, if someone was meeting you for the first time today, like a colleague, let's just say, how would you introduce yourself?
We're on a job site and I'm meeting my colleague for the first time. I would introduce them with my name. I'm Marguerite Vigneri. They probably ask me how long I've been interpreting. So I would give them that answer. That's usually kind of the banter. How long have you been here? I've never met you. Where did you get your training? And so we kind of start that dialogue, but usually just, I'm your team. It's kind of how that would go. So
it sounds like this is very relaxed, nonchalant, no fancy titles, pretty straightforward. Hey, I'm Marguerite Vigneri. I'm your teammate. I'm your co-sign language interpreter. Let's get the job done.
Yep.
Straight and simple. I like it.
Yeah.
So when you were exploring careers, before you got into sign language, what made you choose sign language interpreting versus something else?
Oh, that's a fun story. So I was about 14, 15 years old, and my dad was very strict. And I got into a little bit of trouble in high school. And so at that point, he said, you know what? You don't get to go to school anymore. You have to come and work. And at that point, he was the owner or operator of the cafeteria that's in the basement of the post office in West Sacramento. And if you're not familiar with the West Sacramento post office, it's open 24/7. It's where all the mail goes before it gets distributed to all the little post office locations that you would maybe personally go to yourself. So this was the hub in West Sac. And he would run the cafeteria downstairs. And at the time, that's where most deaf individuals were employed. So this is over 25 years ago at this point. I was watching them as I was cashiering, and I thought, I want to know what they're saying. And at the same time, coincidentally, I had a friend, Jennifer, and she had like a yard sale or something. And she said, I'm getting rid of these books and I'm just perusing through the books and I find the sign language dictionary, and it's very old school. And I'm now homeschooled. And so my homeschool teacher is like, you need a foreign language. So all of this kind of happens within weeks of each other, maybe a month, 2 months. And so I take the dictionary, I'm signing up for a class, and I'm around deaf people for the first time. I've seen my first deaf person. And I'm just thinking to myself, I want to say something to them. I want to say, I want to have a conversation. And so, because, they come to the cash register, we kind of point, and then I show them this is what you owe, and then they move on, and then they sit down, and I'm just watching them. And so I grabbed the dictionary, and I remember looking through the pages, signing, have a nice day, grammatically incorrect in sign language, by the way. I didn't know that at the time. And so I signed it to one of the deaf employees there as he was getting a sandwich, and he laughed, and it was our first actual connection. And I thought, I want to do this. I want to learn. And at the same time, my homeschool teacher said, you need a foreign language. You can do sign language. You can do Spanish. You can go to your local community college. And I thought, oh, my local community college, that means I get to leave the house, because at this point I'm homeschooled. So I just thought, oh, freedom. Yeah, let's do that. Let's do some sign language. I got some deaf people here. Let's learn the language. I love, it's beautiful. The language on your hands is just so beautiful and fascinating. So anyways, one thing led to another, and I joined my first sign language ASL 1 class, and then had access to mentors. I had access to language models. And so I would sit there with them on their breaks, and I would say, okay, how do you sign this? And how do you sign that? And how do you sign this? And I'd come with my little notebook and draw little pictures. And then as I learned the first class and the second class, ASL 1, 2, 3, 4, I learned that there's actually a profession called interpreting. You can become a sign language interpreter. You can get paid for this. And I thought, well, that's kind of cool. And at that point, I had nothing else in my future, like that I was envisioning that I would be doing. I was 15, 16 at this point. And so I thought, well, let me learn this, and the rest is history. I learned, I got mentored. It was really fun. It was a really fun journey. And I enjoyed every second of it too. It never felt like a chore to go to class. So it all fell into my lap. It was really, really great.
That's funny. So it sounds like you were brought into to work. From there, you met some deaf people. You had to take the foreign class, and then this perfect storm just brewed, and you kind of just fell into it.
Absolutely.
And once you were there, you're like, hey, I can make money off this being an interpreter.
Yeah.
Why not? I'm already doing it.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And how long have you been doing it now that you've been in the field, combined with your education?
Oh, well, with education, I started at 16 learning. I remember I was interpreting my first college classes at 19. And so I learned very quickly and started my training. So it's been 21, 22 years that I've been interpreting, but certified since 2009. And so there's a little bit of distinction there, because in our field, if you're certified or if you're qualified, there's this whole ranking, but interpreting for about 20 years and certified for about 16.
Well, let's go there for a moment. So certified versus qualified, what is the difference? That's the first time I've heard that term.
Under California law, you have to be certified to take certain jobs. And so if you are not certified, technically the agencies can't send you. Now, there's another group of interpreters that have yet to be certified. It's a test. It's long and it's pass-fail, and there's lots of little hoops you have to jump through to get there. And so if you're not certified, you can still technically be qualified. What separates me from somebody else is a piece of paper, essentially. I passed the test. They have yet to take the test, or they've taken the test and they failed because maybe they're a bad test taker, but not necessarily a bad interpreter. And so in our field, we often say you can be certified but not qualified, or you could be qualified and not certified, because it goes both ways. There's lots of interpreters that I work with that are phenomenal, that are not yet certified. And then I have the opposite, where I work with people that have been in the game for, 30, 40 years. And I just go, it's time to retire. You're not qualified for this, even though you are certified. I think all professions maybe have a little bit of that, but in our profession, I think it's a phrase that we often refer to just to kind of weed out all the noise and say, yeah, they just weren't qualified for that job.
A piece of paper doesn't really determine if you're a good interpreter or not at the end of the day.
No.
So good is good and everything else is in between. But you mentioned, being in the field, having customers, clients, but people probably don't know, how do they even get an interpreter? So how do you get your clients, and what does a typical day look like for you?
The answer to this is different in every region or state, but from what I see and from what I understand, I'm in California. And the way our region in Sacramento specifically works is that there are agencies that will contract with hospitals, school districts, the state, any local clinic, you name it. Whatever the case is, if you're looking for a sign language interpreter, you typically will go online and type in sign language interpreter near me, and it'll auto-populate an agency for you versus my name specifically. And so you'll get an agency and you'll contact the agency and they'll say, what is the job? And then they go, okay, we've got, so many interpreters that would be qualified or whatever. And then they send out a blast to me with 100 other interpreters. And typically just if you're available and if you are certified, you will see that email. There will also be instances where you're available and you're qualified. You will see that email, depending on the contract of the job. Some jobs really require certification. So if you're not certified, you're not going to see that email. And other jobs just require qualification. And so if the agency has heard of you, you have a good reputation within the community, they'll say this person's also qualified. So you'll get that email. And then it's just a matter of saying, yep, I'm available. That time slot works for me. And so you take the job and you're essentially subcontracted with the agency. And then you show up as a vendor. That's how you get booked on jobs. So I don't do any of the hunting myself, so to speak. The agencies provide the work.
Gotcha. So it sounds like there's a few different flavors to it. You could find a specific sign language interpreting job for a specific company, but more often than not, interpreters are going to join an agency, and the agency is going to send out a notification to different job opportunities, and then whoever's available will get booked and they'll get sent to that job site.
Precisely.
So it kind of sounds like then you're a contractor. So do you have to do your own 1099, W-2, and keep track of your gas and all that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, the interesting world of tax itemizations for an interpreter, it's a lot. If you are working for agencies, you're a 1099 employee, you are an independent contractor. And, if you know the difference, I don't get a W-2. So I'm not working under someone. I don't report to a boss, essentially. I represent myself under that agency. So yeah, it's a lot of keeping track of stuff, but at the same time, it gives me the freedom and the flexibility to do what I need to do when I need to do it, take jobs as I see fit, or not. I really get to pick, and it's a nice place to be in if you need flexibility.
Yeah, that's a great incentive. You could work as much as you want or as little as you want. It really depends on you and your availability to take those jobs.
Absolutely.
So we mentioned the education path a little bit on this and going to school, foreign language, the requirements and so on. So what is the requirements to be a sign language interpreter, or is it different for every region?
1, know the language. 2, you have to know how to interpret. 3, you have to be able to pass the test to become certified. In order to take the test, you have to have a bachelor's degree. Or there is an alternative path, which says, I believe something like so many hours in the community plus some kind of college or education. They kind of count it up, and then you have your quote bachelor's degree, and then you can submit all that information, all your experience, and you can say, hey, certifying body, can you please accept my application? And then they review it, and it's whatever evidence you bring to the table to say you have the equivalent of a bachelor's degree, then you can take the test without necessarily going to school. I haven't seen too many interpreters take that path, so I don't know a whole lot about it in detail, but I know that there is something called the alternative path, and it entails something like that, where you present your experience and you present your some kind of education. I believe you still have to have some kind of units, or maybe it's a combination. If you aren't going that path, then you are essentially getting your bachelor's. And it could be in anything, really. You can know the language inside and out, know how to interpret, and not have a single class under the Deaf Studies program or certification or anything. You can have a bachelor's in social work or psychology. They just want to see the bachelor's, and then you can take the test. And so, but your skills have to be there, but you don't necessarily have to go to school to acquire the skills. But I highly recommend going to school to acquire the skills if you aren't naturally in deaf spaces, or you were raised with a deaf parent or something like that. I don't think I can see a world where you don't go to school and somehow you come out a really gifted interpreter. I haven't seen that yet, because even the best interpreters still go through, the best signers, I should say, still go through a training program. So even if you have the language, the training part of being an interpreter is very different than just knowing the language. There's a lot of different muscles in the brain that have to be exercised to be qualified to interpret. And so highly recommend an interpreter training program to anyone that even just knows the language. I think it's beneficial.
Yeah, sounds good. So typically it sounds like a college degree is going to be preferred. And if not, then there's an alternative path. You might get it from the community or through a loved one or through a friend, and you might have some experience that way. So there are exceptions, but more often than not, it's going to be education and then applying for the certification, or just getting hired to get some experience to be qualified until you can meet that certification threshold to take the exam. For someone new getting into the field, from like 1 to 10, how would you rate the difficulty for learning sign language? Is there something you could compare it to that would be easier, or would give us a rubric to say, maybe it's like getting your CPA as an accountant?
I don't even know what to compare it to, because you really have to want it and you have to put in the hours. It's not something that will just come overnight to you. It's a language, and to be proficient in a language, to have a mastery over the language, it takes a lot of work and a lot of practice. And so if you are dedicated, if you position yourself to make some friends within the community, I think you accelerate really quickly. If you are just taking the classes and you go through the program and you think you're going to come out signing and you're going to have a good grasp on what you're doing, no, the training isn't necessarily going to prepare you for everything that you're going to need to have. It's going to give you the foundation, but you have to practice those foundational skills to create the proficiency that's required to be in the field. It's hard. I think maybe like a doctor. I don't know if I'm speaking out of turn, but it came easy for me, but I was a child, but I know that it's not easy. And there's still things that I'm learning. I learn every day. And I work with people that are absolutely amazing. And they've even had to overcome hurdles and practice. And so learning a language and getting into the community, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. So I don't want to deter anyone because I think it's one of the best jobs in the world. But be prepared to actually put in some effort. It's not one of those, you took the certification to be a phlebotomist and now you can like draw blood. It's not as simple as that. It's a little bit more complex in the profession.
Yeah, it sounds like it's not something you could just wing. You really got to put in the time and effort
Absolutely.
to be successful. What type of mindset or qualities does someone need to have to be successful as a sign language interpreter?
Humility. The deaf community will humble you really quickly. So if you're going in with a lot of pride and you think you know it all and you've got it all because you had one good day, the next day you will meet another deaf person and you will not understand them. And you'll go, oh my gosh, am I even certified? Am I even qualified? How did I get here? You're walking into people's lives. And so to not have the humility for this profession, and you don't even have to be the best interpreter. If you don't walk in with humility, you will not be successful. And so I would say humility first, and then just a determination to get it, a determination to be better, a determination to figure it out, to put in the work, YouTube, making deaf friends in the community, really plugging yourself in to understand that world, especially if you didn't grow up in it. I didn't have the luxury of having a deaf family member or getting it that way. I got lucky. I met some deaf people and I had exposure at a very young age. But at the same time, if you don't have that mentorship, it's really, you have to want it. And I think a lot of people come to the profession wanting to help deaf people. And it's a little bit more than that. So there's a lot of allyship as well. It's not just I'm here to help you, It's a little bit more community building, bridge building with the community and interacting with them and really understanding the needs will get you ahead.
Yeah, it sounds like the humility, the people skills, and the community aspect of it really is going to be the recipe, I guess, for success. Is there anything that the education could not have prepared you for once you got into the field?
Yeah, the whole field. The education does not prepare you. No, it does and it doesn't. The theory, and then you've got like the vocabulary, and maybe you understand sentence structure, and then you start to do the job, and the brain really just isn't exercised enough. Interpreting really requires your whole brain. The synapse cross back and forth, and you have to tap into both to interpret. And that is something that comes with practice. And so you can go through the schooling, but until you're sitting, and we call it the hot seat, until you're in the hot seat doing the actual job, you don't even know what you don't know yet. And the muscle hasn't been worked out enough for you to know where your deficiencies are. And it's not even the same because we have mock interpreting in classes. We sit down, we'll listen to some audio, we'll attempt to interpret it. That's a certain level of pressure, but then you actually are on a job, maybe, probably with the mentor still, but you're the one in the hot seat. And now you have to produce what you're hearing into another language on your hands. And you're like, oh my gosh, what was the sentence structure again? And so it takes a lot of feedback from people watching you and a lot of practice to fix the errors and the feedback you're getting. And then just the scenarios you end up finding yourself in, you're like, wait a minute, we talked about this in class. They said we're supposed to do X, Y, and Z. And then you get there and then you're like, oh, I did X, Y, and Z and it blew up in my face. Why didn't it work? And so you realize these are people. It's not a formula. You walk in and they'll say, you stand here and the interpreter's supposed to stand there and the deaf person's supposed to be in the front. And you get in there and you're like, oh, the deaf person wants to sit in the back. and the presenter doesn't even want you next to them. And, so then your soft skills have to come into place. And again, these are all talked about, but until the rubber meets the road, you're not quite sure how you're going to act or react under pressure and in those positions. And, kind of sharpening those skills just takes time. And the profession, the training itself is just limited. It can't give you what you're going to have in every scenario. And every scenario is different. And so I walk into doctors' offices all day. And let me tell you, COVID happened and everything went out the window. And all of a sudden, I'm advocating in a new way. I am learning to navigate masks, clear masks, doctors' preferences, deaf person's preferences, the language itself, half of it's on the face. So there was no training that trained me on that, right? And so you had to be able to pivot and use soft skills to navigate those situations as well. And you don't know what you have or don't have until you're put in those positions, right? Your own triggers come up, your own biases come up, and it's a real art to learn to suspend those judgments while you're doing your job.
I can see the complexities once you're in the field. It's way different than what the education path looked like. But you mentioned COVID, and I was curious, with the mask on, and since so much language comes from facial expressions, how did you navigate the COVID era with interpreting when you can't see people's faces?
Yeah, it was a struggle. I may have ruffled some feathers in that season of our lives. I know my deaf clients really appreciated that I didn't wear a mask because so much of the language is on the face through the facial expressions. And so navigating that with the doctors, like I said, there was a little bit of advocacy that needed to be done in order to have that, to be able to do my job. It's kind of like asking a surgeon to show up for heart surgery, but you're not going to give them access to their tools. They're not going to be able to do their job. And so convincing doctors who are in their profession, with their degrees and their prestige, to be told, I know that the rule is that we're to keep our masks on, but for this situation, I'm going to take my mask off so that what you are saying is clearly communicated. And watching like the doctor's brain go, oh my gosh, she's going to take her mask off. And then, you can just see like, well, the rules are this and the rules are that and COVID. And I'm like, yeah, this is, and it was preference, right? There was lots of interpreters who wouldn't even leave their house. There's lots of interpreters that refused to work in person at that time. And everybody had their own reasons, and it was no judgment, but my convictions were, if I'm going to go out and service the community, servicing the community looks like me taking off my mask for me and my personal convictions, because I knew so much of the language is on my face. I don't even understand the deaf person when they have their mask on. And so it was such a challenge. And it was, if the deaf person was comfortable, we would negotiate. Can you take off your mask so I can understand and voice for you clearly? And if they said no, then we would just, what does that mean? What do you mean? Can you say that again? I don't understand. Can you clarify? So the appointments were just longer, and it tested everyone's patience, but you got to do your job. And so, yeah, it was definitely learning as you go in that season, because there was no amount of education that could have prepared me for COVID.
Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, the analogy you brought up is a good one. A surgeon trying to do surgery without any tools, like, you're going to kill a patient. Glad it's behind us at this point.
Me too. Absolutely.
So I was doing some research online, and there's a difference between knowing sign language and being culturally fluent. Being culturally fluent, that term kept coming up. So what does that mean, and how is that different from just being a sign language interpreter?
I don't know what the definition really is, but I'll give you my perspective on it, the way I would define it. And every interpreter might define this differently. I would say that being an interpreter means that you come in and you're facilitating the language to the best of your abilities, and you get the job done and you leave, I guess, in simplest terms. To be culturally fluent I would think there's a little bit more layers in terms of just technicalities. How you're delivering that message will just look different. The way a deaf person signs versus the way a person signs is very different, right? You can learn Spanish. You can go to Mexico. You can start speaking. There's going to be an accent. The longer you're in Mexico, though, that accent eventually 2, 3, 10 years down the road gets washed away because you're just totally immersed. You pick up their slang, you pick up their lingo, you pick up whatever's happening within that region even, right? Because language changes from region to region. And all those little nuances that you've picked up because you've been totally immersed will show up when you leave Mexico and you come back to California and then you're interpreting for a Spanish speaker in front of you. You will sound more like a native speaker because of how immersed you've been in the culture and with the people. And so I would think one of the best compliments that you can get as an interpreter is, are your parents deaf? Because the way you're interpreting or the way you're presenting the language, those nuances are there enough to kind of set you apart, to say you've been in the field very long and you're new. You can tell the difference. And that's one of the best compliments that you can ever get is, are your parents deaf? Where did you learn sign language? Wow, you're really fluent. You get that and you go, oh, good. I'm presenting the language in its truest, to the best of my abilities, right? I'm not deaf. And so, but I'm presenting the language in the most culturally true way that I can in this situation with the skills that I have. And it passes, kind of the sniff test where they're kind of on the fence going, hey, wait a minute, did you grow up with deaf people? So I would say that's how I would define it, as more of that example where deaf people kind of see you go and they pick up that you have some nuances that maybe somebody who's fresh out of the program wouldn't have. So
Yeah, I could definitely see like little mannerisms and gestures for sure. What's one thing that hearing people would be totally surprised about to learn about the deaf culture?
Hearing people are surprised by some of the things that we interpreters encounter or what we have to navigate, because that's not their world. That's not something they've had to experience. And it's cultural. So I think there's just a lot of differences between the deaf culture and the hearing world that kind of clash, that hearing people would say, oh, I didn't even consider that, or I didn't even think that. So
that is a little surprising, actually. Like, they have their own culture, own community, own style of doing things, and they're very different in the way hearing people interact.
Yeah.
So then what about misconceptions? Is there a common misconception that people have about the deaf community?
I'm not deaf, so I don't want to be the authoritative person in this subject or on this question. But I would say, from talking with my friends that are deaf, one thing that really frustrates them is, oh, you can't lip read? I think that's a big one. That's kind of a debated topic amongst hearing people, is this perception that you're deaf, and if you're looking at me, you can read my lips. And so that question, like, can you lip read? Can you read my lips? Or I'll look at you so you can read my lips, I think is a huge misconception. For sure, that'd be one of them.
Yeah, I think I've even thought that if I run across a deaf person, I'm always trying to sound out the words a little bit slower, or I'm trying to figure out how to communicate with them. So I guess I fall into that misconception of thinking that a deaf person may understand me better. Or is that belittling them, or is that demeaning? Or have you ever heard complaints like, this hearing person, what a jerk. He kept trying to use his mouth to communicate, and could have taken out a pencil or a notepad or a text message. He could have just wrote something down and just showed me what he was trying to say.
Yeah, I think deaf people, they're not a monolith either. It's not a, if you're deaf, you're gonna feel this way. Every person is so different. But I would say that in general, if I can generalize, there is a sense of feeling like oppressed in that situation. It's very presumptuous, I guess, and it shows the ignorance on a hearing person if they're going to assume that you can lip read. And so it's a little bit, maybe annoying is the best word. If you've spent your whole life telling people you can't do that, and then you keep getting it, I think at some point you're just ticked off. You're like, oh my gosh, this question again. I wish people would just know. People don't know what they don't know. So I think deaf people are definitely upset. There's a lot of conversations about that being a trigger or a potential trigger. So again, not all deaf people would maybe react that way, but I've definitely had my deaf friends who are annoyed with that question. Like, no, I don't know what you're saying, and even if they might, they'll just lean in harder and say, I don't know what you're saying, to force you to feel uncomfortable, because you're now getting a sense of what it's like to not be understood, right? And so it's almost like how does it feel to be in my shoes, So, and even if someone was proficient at lip reading, I think the statistics are like 60% is missed or something like that. So,
Right.
yeah, it's not a reliable form of communication at all.
Yeah, and I guess that's one way they were probably more similar than not, because if someone kept asking me the same thing throughout my life, different people, I would definitely get tired of giving that same response, and I'll try to figure out how to be short, or at some point you turn into a game, make the other person feel uncomfortable.
Absolutely.
One question that I often think about, and I'm sure maybe the audience is thinking about, is for hearing people. They have inner thoughts. When we think and we talk to ourselves in speaking language. But what about the deaf community? When they have their inner thoughts, do they sign? Do they have inner thoughts?
Or
how do they process information?
I have no idea.
Okay.
I am not the expert in that. I am not deaf. And I don't think I've even ever asked a deaf friend,
So
hey, how do you, I've never thought about their thoughts. So I can't even answer that. I'm not even going to try.
For the listeners out there, if you know somebody, please leave it in the comments below. I would love to know the answer to this question. So we talked about misconceptions around deaf people and stuff like that, but what about for interpreters? Are there misconceptions about you, things that people believe as a sign language interpreter that are true but are not actually true?
Oh man, my job is so funny. There's a lot of misconceptions about the language. So they'll say, is there a sign for every word? There's that misconception there. And I say, no, I interpret, it's a concept for concept. It's not word for word. It has its own structure, its own grammar. And so there's, sometimes I'll get those questions. And so I'll tell them, and then they'll say, oh, or is it universal? Can you talk to any deaf person? I'm like, no, it's American Sign Language. If you go to France, there's something else there. You go to Russia, there's something else there. Each culture, each region has its own language. And they'll say, oh yeah, that kind of makes sense, And so you kind of see the wheels turning sometimes with these questions, because it's a language, but because it's visual, they assume that everybody understands it, and it's different from state to state. In America, we're using American Sign Language, but region to region, different accents, different signs. I used to do video relay interpreting for a long time. And even that, I would see signs. I'm like, I've never seen that sign. I understood every single thing this person said. And then they signed this one sign. What did that mean? And it's that's to their region. They'll sign the word outside differently. And I'm like, that whole sentence made no sense to me, because they just used the sign for outside. But that's my understanding is a completely different word. So then all of a sudden my whole brain glitches. I'm like, wait, what did I just see? That didn't make any sense. So you have to stop the conversation and ask for clarification, or hope that you could figure out the sentence and kind of, you step back and go, I don't know that sign, but I know the words around it, just like you would do in reading. And then you take your best stab at it, which again, I've made mistakes, and then I go, oh, that was not the right interpretation. And then you have to back up and start over. So there's a lot of misconceptions around the language itself. Is it universal? Do I know every word? How am I keeping up? It's so fast, things like that. And so, or they'll slow down their speech because they think I'm signing word for word. So then you have a doctor who will talk like this, and I'm like, just talk your normal pace, and so then they're thrown off by that. So you see them trying to accommodate, but it's an accommodation based on their misconception. And so there's lots of things you're navigating every day when you're out there on the job.
Yeah, definitely. I think that the one that stands out to me anyways, is that sign language interpreting is not the same as the English language. To your point, it's concept of concept, and it's a lot more dynamic. There's one thing that I've heard some people get once they get into the field, is that they end up getting a deaf name. So can you explain, what is that? And do you have one? And how do you get one?
Yeah, it's really cool. It's called a sign name, and it's a sign that represents your name, and you cannot make it up yourself. And so it's based on character. Usually when someone in the deaf community gets to know you, as you're going through the program, or as you get introduced to the community somehow and you start signing, there will be usually a deaf person who will say, "What's your name?" And then you spell your name out and they'll say, "What's your sign name?" And you'll say, "I don't have one." And they'll go, "Oh, I want to give you a sign name." And sometimes it takes months to come up with one based on the relationship. I mean, I don't know. For me, it was a deaf friend in college and I have long curly hair. At that time, initialized sign. So my name is Marguerite. So my name would be signed with an M. And then there's some kind of characteristic that's defining. And then that would become my name. Traditionally, I mean, it's really changed now. And there's really fun sign names that I'm like, oh man, that's cool. But mine's just really, it's when you meet people and you go, "What's your sign name?" You can kind of tell what like generation or what era they got their sign name in because it's really morphed at this point. But the point to your question is that it's given to you by a deaf person. It usually is something about your character or what you look like physically. And yeah, and so mine is with an M. This is the letter M. And then I have long curly hair at the time. I still have curly hair, so it would be like this because the sign for curly is like this. And so they would do the M, and then that would be your sign name. And so that was what was given to me. And sometimes I worked at this office for a while. I was in and out often, and they changed my sign name. So your sign name can change too. And the deaf people there decided my sign name was going to be this instead. And so because they had long curly hair. And so it was just, so they would just, "Where's Marguerite?" That this is what they would sign when they were talking about me. And so it's really, but the community knows me as this. Sometimes I get lazy and I do this, which is not what I should be doing. But, and somebody gave that to me very early on. And then that's your sign name. But it can change. You can move. New deaf people, they don't like that. They're going to give you something else because it doesn't quite fit, and then your sign name morphs. Some people never have a sign name because their name is so short. And so then it's whatever their name is and it's spelled. And then that's that. So yeah, it's really cool, but you can't give it to yourself. It's kind of a rite of passage, like the community bestows your sign name and then it's almost like you're one of us, So it's a real honor and you cannot make it up yourself and you can't give yourself a sign name.
Yeah, that's very cool. It's like kind of getting a nickname, essentially. You're going to get your first sign name, but as you kind of go from group to group or you meet more people, if they change it, they just give you a nickname in a different variation. Like people can call you, maybe they call you Marguerite, maybe they call you Marg or Margot, and you could change based on your groups and how close they are to you and the type of generation that they're from. So that's kind of cool that the deaf community kind of has something similar, that they'll kind of experiment with the name and change it based on how they feel and what they give you. What do you do when you're in a situation where the person is maybe at a live event or a keynote where you can't stop, you can't tell them to slow down and you have to keep signing and they're just speaking so fast? What do you do in those situations?
Oh, you just sink or swim. This is where you hope that you have a really good team because often we do not work alone. So if I'm going to be in a situation where there's a keynote speaker, anything over an hour really is done with another interpreter. Sometimes sets of 4, sometimes with deaf interpreters. I mean, there's so many different ways that we are paired these days. And if you're in a situation where you are the weaker link, you rely heavily on your team and your team kind of supports you through that, where they're an extra pair of ears. They're not on the hot seat per se, but they are still watching you while it's your turn. And you do your best. You do your best.
Do they give you like signs from the side and then they like talk to you?
Yeah. We call it a feed. And so if let's say I'm on stage and this happens often when you're on stage and the speakers are behind you, they're projecting this way. For some reason, the audio falls flat. Like you want sound this way. And so things become muffled sometimes in a bad situation. So you would look to your team because it'll say, they'll say a name and you'll go, what was that? Or what was the last name? Or, what title did they have? Because it's just gargly or it was spoken so fast and you missed it because there's no signs. Your finger spelling everything that you're hearing. You look to your team and then they'll give it to you. And this is all happening simultaneously. So you're still getting input. Now you're getting input visually. You're still getting input auditorily, and you still have to be producing something. It is a juggling act in your brain. And so, if you have a good team, then that makes all the difference in the world. And so you just hope that in those situations, you're paired well. But there's a lot of work you do before you get to that. If I see that I'm going to be on stage, I will research who I'm interpreting. I will try to listen to something that they've done before. If it's a monthly meeting that's live streamed, I'll try to catch the previous one just to kind of get an idea of vernacular, names, the setup, what I'm walking into. Any good interpreter will do their homework before they walk into a situation like that. So I don't find myself in many of those situations because I will look at a job and say, I'm certified. Am I qualified for this job? Because just because you're certified doesn't make you qualified, right? We talked about that in the beginning of this. And so when you get a job or you see a request that goes out there, you first have to pause and take inventory of yourself. Am I in the right mental space? What is the subject on? Is that something that conflicts with my own biases? Am I able to suspend them in the moment for that interpretation that needs to happen? There's lots of questions that you ask yourself before you even take the job. And so oftentimes I think, I'm not an agency owner, but maybe if I can speak on behalf of the agencies, they'll get complaints like, why did you pair me with this person? They weren't qualified for the job, and they'll say, well, everybody has to do their own inventory, right? The agency can't vet you for you. You have to kind of look at yourself and say, yeah, I'm certified. Should I be at this rally? Should I be at this doctor's appointment? Should I be, on stage with this political figure? Those are questions you have to ask yourself. And so if you've done your due diligence, you don't find yourself in those situations. Now, if you've done all of that and you do find yourself in that situation, chances are you have a really good team because they've also done their due diligence, and you've just are put in a situation where you're probably both navigating some difficult things. And so you rely on each other, you do the best you can because maybe you can't stop them, and those are very challenging situations. And so case by case, there's no hard and fast rule. And these are some of the things that you talk about in training where, they'll give you these scenarios and they'll say, what do you do? And, the right answer is you stop the presenter and you ask for clarification. And then you get there and you're like, I'm not stopping the governor. What are you talking about? I can't say, what did you mean by that? And so it's always based on the context of that situation and how you would approach it and what you're allowed to do. And so you do your best. You do your best, the best that you can. Yeah, there's been some situations where I have definitely been the weaker link and I'm like, oh man, I'm so thankful for a good team here. And you don't put out your best work on those days, but at the end of the day, it doesn't define you either. And so you got to have some grace for yourself too.
Yeah, definitely. That word of humility definitely comes back in my mind as I'm hearing the conversation. What about a concept that's not interpretable, where there is no translation from deaf culture to American culture or vice versa? How do you navigate those situations, or do those situations even ever come up?
I would say if there's a concept that is not interpretable, it's not that it's not interpretable. The limitation is within the interpreter. And so I would say I don't think there's any concept that you can't interpret. I think everything is interpretable. It would be the limitations of the interpreter that presents that roadblock. And so, yeah, don't ask me to interpret physics because I don't even get it. It's not within my own capacity to understand it. However, it is interpretable, right? But it's just my own limitations that's put on that subject matter. And so I have come across lots of things that I'm like, I don't know how to interpret that. But it doesn't mean that it can't be interpreted. So,
yeah. What about jokes and sarcasm? Does that translate to American culture? And people are trying to banter with one another, and you're like, how do I even translate this?
Yeah. We had talked about cultural fluency, and that would be one of those that if you have mastered that, the cultural fluency, you can take, I think what you're referring to is like an idiom maybe, right? And you can take that concept and apply it. Now, will it land the same? Probably not. But you can take concept for concept, right? Like, let's just say you've got ants in your pants. Okay, well, you don't really have ants in your pants. And if you were to sign ants in your pants, it's very visual that there's bugs in your pants. And that wouldn't make sense maybe if the deaf person has never seen that idiom in English and has never had that explained to them in English, then that wouldn't make sense, right? So there are, I guess, in those terms, to your first question, there would be some things that don't translate as well. But concept for concept, I could absolutely interpret, you got ants in your pants. It just wouldn't look like you've got bugs in your pockets, But then would the joke land? Probably not. If it was meant to be a joke, the joke may not land. So there are some things that are just like, oh, that's not funny in sign language. And vice versa. There's some things that are so funny in sign language because it's based on hand shape, hand placement, hand movement, and the deaf culture. That is so funny. If you know sign language, you're like, oh my gosh, that's hilarious. It doesn't translate to English because you're like, well, let me explain this to you. So in sign language, the sign for whatever is made with this hand shape, and then that hand shape was put in this place, which also is like a double entendre for like this thing. And it's like, if you don't have the language explaining placement of hand shapes and movements, it's irrelevant to the person who's taking language in linearly through their ears. So yeah, there's definitely, in those terms, I would say it doesn't translate well. It can be interpreted. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it definitely won't land.
Yeah.
You mentioned video relay earlier as well as interpreting in person. So how do they differ, and is one harder than the other?
Oh, video relay. Those are some good days. Video relay is a very interesting, little subset within the field. I don't even know if that's the right way to explain it, but you're essentially interpreting on video, and video relay, VRS is what we would call it. You wear a headset, you're in front of a screen, you got your monitor here, you get a phone call, you answer, you're the middle person for that phone call. And it goes either way. If a deaf person's calling, they pop up on your screen. And if a hearing person is calling, they pop up in your headset. Either way, you're connecting two people together and you become the voice for both sides. I'm the voice with my hands for the hearing person, and I'm the literal voice for the deaf person that I'm seeing on my screen. And so that is a different set of skills that you need to be able to navigate that part of interpreting if you were in a video relay service type of job. And so you've got 2D versus 3D, sign falls flat on a screen versus in person. Technology, as advanced as it is, there's still glitches, there's still technical issues that you can run into. And then because technology is so amazing, there's also some drawbacks. So now you've got your deaf clients on their phones. So they're this big, it's Blair Witch Project, the phone's going like this and they're signing with one hand and you're like, oh my gosh, please stop. I can't understand you. And again, it's a muscle that needs to be exercised. And so what you do on your hands is very different than what you take in with your eyes. And and that is a completely different set of skills than you just interpreting with your, taking input and having output. It's a very different skill to have input through the eyes and to be able to say what you're seeing. And so there's lots of interpreters that are fantastic at hearing something and putting it out. And then they can see the deaf person respond and they go, and they freeze. And I've been there. So I'm not on a pedestal of self-righteousness here, I have it together. But video relay, you have to have the skills for both because you're providing the conversation. You are the in-between, and you have to learn different sets of skills to mitigate what you don't know, right? So if you see something and you're not quite sure what they just said, you're trying to stall on the phone, you're asking for clarification, maybe you say, hey, hold on. It's a different set of skills there that you have to learn to navigate phone call after phone call after phone call. And so it's unique in its own challenges because it's 2D and navigating a phone call where the hearing person doesn't see what you're seeing, and half the time they don't even know what you're doing. They think they're talking to Joe Schmo, and really they are, but because there's this little lag of my lack of understanding, or I'm trying to get a better understanding, I have to, we call them like fillers. You got to go, yeah, 1 second. And you're sitting there like, clarify that. What does that mean? Okay. And so you're constantly trying to make this conversation as seamless as possible for both ends. Some phone calls are harder than others. Let's just say that.
Well, it sounds like it could be a lot more complex in the video relay call versus doing something in person. The 2D with the paralanguage, the facial expressions, and so on versus, hey, you're right there. You can see everything.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a little bit easier. What about burnout? There's got to be some strain with like carpal tunnel and things like that. So how do you deal with the risks that come with constantly interpreting? Is there tips and tricks to keep your hands intact? I mean, that's your career, right?
It is. Yeah, that's a good question. It's individual for each person and their own physical limitations. So I've been very, very blessed. I have not had any real big issues. I think the biggest one was when I was working for Video Relay, the mouse. That was actually more than the signing. It was navigating the software that I had to navigate, and the computer and the keyboard and the mouse. And they, over time, we didn't have to click. We could use the keypad, the space bar on the keypad. But even with that, the repetitive motion, I would get pinched nerve on my right side. And so after leaving Video Relay, that went away. So I was like, oh gosh, it was absolutely from the job. And so it was slowly, like the burnout wasn't even the signing. It was just the sitting, and so you have to recognize your own physical limitations. That's my personal limitation, but other people have done that for years and they've had no problem, and they've found ways to mitigate that. And so interpreters will definitely experience some type of wrist something. I think every interpreter I know has said, oh, my wrist and carpal tunnel, could be something there too. But it's usually coupled with a couple other things. It's not just you interpreting. It's usually the sitting, if you're navigating software, if you're the repetitive movement of one thing. Signs are not repetitive in that same way. And so this is my not authoritative answer. I would say it's coupled with the environment when you get injured, because I don't think the job itself should produce injury. We work in pairs. We take turns every 20 minutes. You shouldn't, as a good interpreter, find yourself in a position where you are overextending yourself. You should know your limitations. Again, we had talked about taking inventory. So taking jobs that make sense to your physical limitations and your needs, you can navigate that very easily. And so if you find yourself in some kind of physical burnout or mental burnout, then doing some inventory of where you are would benefit you to mitigate that risk.
That makes sense. It's not so much the sign language interpreting, it's more of the posture of where you're at, what you're doing, where you're sitting. But you mentioned having 2 signers at a job. So is that why you have 2 interpreters go to every job, or?
No, actually, it's really based in science. They have taken a look at the interpreter brain and interpreting in general and where the language breaks down. And they have seen that there is an optimal time range where the interpretation is most effective and most accurate. And it is within about the 20-minute range. And so we work in pairs, and if it's over an hour, and depending on the content too, sometimes something that goes an hour will still be accommodated with two interpreters. But anything over an hour is usually sent with 2. And that is so that you can maintain correct interpretation for that whole duration of that speaking engagement, whatever it is. If it's over an hour, they'll send 2. We take turns somewhere between 15 to 20 minutes, because science has shown that that is the most optimal range for the most accurate interpretation. Once you go 30 minutes, 40 minutes, the inaccuracies increase like double, triple. And so for the integrity of the message, the profession has kind of best practices. If it's over an hour, send 2.
Gotcha. So it may not always be the case, but for the integrity, you may get 2 interpreters, and that's a best practice.
Yeah.
What about artificial intelligence? It's kind of like the buzzword going around, and there's a lot of image creation, video creation, all this good stuff that's happening out in the content creation field. Is that impacting the sign language interpreting field at all?
I haven't seen it. Like we had talked about, sign language is so dynamic and so contingent on region and location and all of that, that I will be impressed if they can figure that out, because there's also not just one way. You can take the same sentence and put 3 interpreters up there and you'll get 3 different interpretations. And so when I think about AI, I just think, how would they be able to kind of take all those nuances into consideration and put that out there? Is it impossible? I don't think it's impossible, but I would be curious to see how that works. But it's yet to be seen from what I know. Maybe there's something out there. If you see it and I just have missed it, send it to me. I want to see it. But no, as far as I know, I don't think our job is in jeopardy with AI at all.
Yeah, for sure. That makes a lot of sense. Going back to when you first got into the field of sign language, if you weren't doing sign language today, what do you think you'd be doing?
I have so many passions. I feel like I could be doing anything. I don't know. I have no idea. Probably owning a bakery somewhere. If I'm being honest, I love baking. I love cooking. It's a little dream of mine to have a cafe. But I also really I love interpreting. I do genuinely love my job. And so if I was to go out for a profession, I don't know what I would go out for. There's nothing that would spark my interest that I can think of. I think I have more of a creative brain. Most interpreters do. And so I would probably find myself in some kind of entrepreneurial, run my business, do something creative, maybe photography or baking or something like that. I don't think I could see myself in some kind of corporate world trying to climb some corporate ladder and behind a desk. Definitely not for me. So I don't know. I don't know what I would be doing.
Let's say you could go back and sit with your younger self. And that was the younger self that was just stepping into this field as a new sign language interpreter. What advice would you give yourself after everything you've learned, experienced, and been through?
Self-inventory. We've talked about that a lot. I have found myself in positions where I have said, I didn't do my due diligence before I got here. And so thankfully, I can look back and say none of them were life-altering decisions that I had made in terms of the impact on me or the deaf client or that situation. But was I the best fit? Was I qualified for that job? No, I was not. I would have learned to take inventory a little bit better, but you don't know what you don't know. And so you find yourself in situations and then you realize, oh, here's a limitation of mine. And so I would tell my younger self to be a little bit more mindful and to pause and to really look at and try to predict maybe some of my limitations before I was to take a certain job or not. And I made a lot of mistakes in my early 20s, first 1, 2, 3 years of interpreting before I was certified. You get your feet wet and you go, oh my gosh, this is not what they taught me. And then how come I don't know this? And why did I say yes to this job? And so to pay attention to that a little bit more. And, within the time I do that less, but that would be definitely something that I wish I was more aware of.
Yeah, that's great advice for someone stepping into the field. Just check in with yourself to see if you're the right fit for the job.
Yeah.
Now, if you could channel your inner deaf community, I know they have their own community, but you've been around them for a while. What is one thing that they would want you to share with the listeners out there?
If I could maybe rephrase that question and just say, what would be one thing I could advocate for on their behalf? I would say, we all can learn to sign. They cannot learn to hear. That's the limitations that they have in terms of them taking in auditory input, right? So, but we can learn to sign. And so I would hope that more people would just take an interest in learning some basic communication with the deaf community and attempting to have some more interactions so the worlds can cross.
Yeah, that's a great point. And note taken myself. Is there a question that the listeners out there are just dying for me to ask you that I haven't asked you yet?
I will say there's an element of surprise from hearing people to know that I am in every section of the world. If you've been in surgery, I've been interpreting that surgery. If you've been in a drug deal, I've interpreted that drug deal. If you've been in a car accident, if you've made a spicy phone call, if you've called to yell at somebody, if you've called to order pizza, everything, whatever you experience as a person, deaf people are experiencing that too. And so to keep that in mind, that they experience everything just like you would,
Yeah, that's great insight. It's more than just a transaction.
Absolutely.
You're doing sign language interpreting. Do you have a story that's really memorable that you can share without getting into any confidentiality disclosures or anything like that?
Yeah, there's a lot, but I'll share one that I think I always go back to. And again, this is with the whole concept of humility and inventory of who you are. Are you qualified versus certified? All of that stuff. I remember I was 24 years old. I was not even certified yet. Definitely was not qualified. And I had just signed up with an agency and I was so excited. I was down south in Southern California. I had just moved and was just kind of getting my feet wet with, I was doing some K-12 work. I was doing some video relay work. And, people were signing up with agencies. This concept of freelancing came up and so I signed up. This agency never vetted me, never, they just were like, how many years of experience, and I'm like, I was like 19, I'm 24, 5, that sounds like a lot. But really, like I hadn't had a whole lot of experience. I was in very confined situations up until that point. And so up until you start freelancing, you're really kind of just, doing the same thing over and over again. You can get comfortable and think you're qualified. And so I had definitely found myself there thinking I could do some freelance work and I could, I want to try what's out there in the community. And so this job, which nobody wanted, was out in the mountains about an hour away. And so they were paying a little bit more. And I thought, okay, it was late at night, no cell service. And it's like an Alcoholic Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous situation, but the meetings are held on site of where they even sleep. Like it's like this whole residential program out into the mountains, no cell service or anything. And here I am accepting a job, no team. I'm like, yeah, sure, sign me up, and just not thinking at all. And again, self-inventory. I get there and everybody there is really nice. It's all men. So I have to realize I'm a female, young female, walking into a situation with all men that are, some kind of alcoholic or drugs or something that they're coming out of. It's a residential program. So, okay, this is the environment I'm walking into. It's in the woods. It's at nighttime. I'm an hour away from home. I have no cell service. And I'm in this situation and my client is a male. And everybody there is very gracious. Thanks for being here. Thanks for helping. And they go into story time. As most, if you've ever even had an idea of what AA is like, you share your testimony, you talk about what you've been through, where you're coming out of. And all of a sudden they're talking about like drugs and hiding it up their butt and being strip searched and the cops and getting pulled over and then just the different types of drugs that they've done. And I'm signing this at this point and I'm going, okay, this is so outside of my own even life experiences. Like, how do I sign that I like put my pipe up my butthole? Like, I don't know. And so I'm sitting here going, oh, what are the tools? What's the classifiers? What's the hand shape? Because again, the program doesn't like prepare you for Alcoholic Anonymous testimony, right? Specifically, it doesn't. And so I'm sitting there sweating by myself. I have no team. I have no one to be like, what's the sign for that? How would you, nothing. So I shouldn't have even taken the assignment, right? Now I look back. And then as if I'm not drowning enough, then they're like, anyone else want to come up? And my client raises his hand and I'm like, oh my gosh, he's going to go up there. What is he going to say? I don't know his story. I've just, it's a light conversation. I get there very like 10 minutes before we just kind of walk and we start. And so he gets on the mic and he's signing. And now I'm like, okay, I'm hearing all these things. Okay, now I'm seeing all these things. Now I got to put it out verbally. So he's talking about what he's done. And then he goes into this rant about the interpreter because he's become possessive over me. This is maybe my third time being there. And I'm not even quite sure how to navigate with the agency to say, hey, I'm feeling a little awkward and uncomfortable on these jobs. I haven't figured out that yet. And so I get there, and on this particular job, it's like 3 jobs in, he starts laying into the audience.
Wow.
Don't look at my interpreter. I see you looking at her. And I'm voicing, and then he's cussing. I don't even cuss. And so I'm like, the F word's trying to come out of my mouth, and I'm stumbling, and I'm going, oh my gosh, like, get me out of here. This is not, it was my last time I was there. Yeah. After that, I was like, never again, never again. I'm not, and so a little bit scarring because I'm like, I'm trying to facilitate, and after that whole situation, as I'm leaving, nobody's talking to me. The 2 nights before, all the guys are like, thanks for being here. Thanks for being here. Oh, it's so cool what you do. The guys are trying to talk to me, and I'm like, oh, you're welcome. Okay, thanks. I'm trying to run to my car. And then after that, he blasted everybody, don't talk to her. And then they're hearing my voice. So they think I'm saying it. They think me, Marguerite, the interpreter, is saying it. And so you have to sometimes remind people, I'm their voice. These are not my opinions. These are not my thoughts. They're his thoughts. And so that was so
wow.
Never again. After I left, I was like, I am not qualified for that job. I was not certified, not qualified. I had no business trying to do an AA meeting, fresh out of the interpreter training program, very little experience under my belt. And then I'm in this situation and no team, by myself, like just the layers of just things that could have, happened. I just go, man, that was very eye-opening to realize my own limitations. And so I've come a long way since then, and I can do AA meetings now. But that first one, man, really taught me a lot about myself and just how much further I have to grow and learn to be able to say yes to that type of job. So definitely a fun one that I can't forget, even if I tried.
Wow, that's crazy. So it sounds like you have to even do the yelling when they yell, or they do the facial expressions, or if they soften up, or if they start cursing, you have to enact their full embodiment.
I embody their whole presence to the best of my abilities. Yeah.
Dang, that's crazy. So you're just yelling at these people at this point?
Yeah, it was so bad. I was like, oh my God. And as they're leaving, I'm like, it wasn't me, it was him. It wasn't just a reminder, it wasn't my voice, it was his, like his words. And I look back now and I'm like, should I have even been explaining myself? I don't even know, but it was such a situation that I'm like, this is why you have a team. I definitely learned a lot. And that situation is like a situation that I will tell when I'm mentoring or something to younger interpreters and say, hey, I've been in your shoes where I've taken jobs that I was not qualified for. And these are the lessons I left with that situation. And so it's a good discussion point because, you don't know what you don't know. So
yeah, that's great insight for the next generation of sign language interpreters.
Yeah.
Where can people go to find more resources on sign language interpreting or deaf culture in general?
There's lots of resources for local agencies here. And then those agencies have resources. And then American River College here in Sacramento, they have a great interpreter training program. I think it's called Interpreter Preparation Program now, IPP. So they have a great IPP program. Los Rios College, Los Rios School District Community College, they have great resources, ASL classes. And so, yeah, your local community college has them here in Sacramento. And then the agencies are a great resource as well. And then just good old Google, I'm sure, will help you if it's something really, really specific. But I would say, yeah, the agencies and the colleges are a really good place to start.
That's great. I have a segment where the last guest leaves a question for the next guest. And the question that I have for you is, how did your expectations of the industry that you were getting into when you came in differ from the experience that you actually had when you entered the industry?
If I could sum it up, I would say, they didn't teach this. They didn't tell me about this one. Or, it's what you're trained to do. And then what you end up doing sometimes are very different. And so, yeah, I think that answers it, I hope.
Yeah, it's in that line, in that vein of if you had an expectation of what the job would be,
throw it out the window.
Yeah. You have a plan, 3 seconds into that plan, it's gone.
Yeah, you get there, you're so prepared. You're like, I know where I'm going to sit and I know where they're going to want to be and I know what's going to happen. And you're like, wait, what? So yeah, expectations, how you were trained and what you actually experience in real time. Only real time trains you for real time. So
Marguerite, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the Key Concepts Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
If today's conversation opened up your eyes or sparked curiosity or deepened your respect for the sign language field, we hope you'll continue to learn and stay connected. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Key Concepts Podcast, and we'll catch you on the next one. Bye-bye.